one point or another, all kids rebel against their parents to some degree. And we still love them, they still love us. But there are days where those relationships are a little strained. A little strained. Sometimes it's as toddlers that they rebel, and they're testing the boundaries of what will and will not pass. Sometimes it is in the teen years where parents are at their wits' end and they're just not really sure what they're going to do with them. Not sure whether or not they're going to live to see the end of their teen years. And yet there are other times where there are some kids that never get out of that state. That's right. And yet we all grew. The question this morning is that you in relationship to God? How about as a Christian? Does it describe you? How about grumbling? Does grumbling describe you? Grumbling is not rebellion. As a matter of fact, grumbling is different. The dictionary, Webster's, defines grumbling as muttering or growling. Anybody who has asked their kid to do the dishes will probably say, yes, we understand that it is muttering and growling. This morning, we're going to continue our series through the Old Testament in this kind of survey of Israel from Moses to the exile, looking at the failures of Israel and attempting to learn from them. Today, we are going to be in Numbers 16. We move forward this morning to Korah's rebellion. The rebellion of Korah is mentioned in the New Testament, actually, in the book of Jude. And I remember reading this and it catching my eye the first time in Jude going, because he's lumped with Cain, Balaam, and Korah is the three people that it says, woe to them, for they have gone the way of Cain. They've perished, or they have, for profit, have gone the way of Balaam, and they have perished in the rebellion of Korah. And it's kind of odd. It struck me as odd that those three were kind of lumped together there. But basically, this is the story of the rebellion of Korah, and this is going to set the foundation for, I'm kind of working through a sermon series next year that is going to tackle these three ideas. So having a base knowledge of what Korah's rebellion is today is going to pay dividends down the road as we explore this in a bigger idea next year. But basically, the Korah's rebellion. Let me read the first few verses here, the first three verses here. It says, "Now Korah was the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab. On, the son of Peleth, son of Reuben, took action, and they rose up before Moses, together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of renown. They assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, 'You have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourself above the assembly of the Lord?'" So we have Korah. By the way, Korah is Moses and Aaron's cousin. Okay? This is their cousin because he is a Levite. Okay? So Korah with Dathan, Abiram, and On of the sons of Reuben, and 250 leaders that were a part of the nation of Israel have assembled together against Moses and Aaron. And at first glance, there's the first part of what he says really isn't necessarily wrong. You've gone far enough for the congregation are holy. Okay, well, indeed, it is the nation of Israel. They are holy. Holy. All holy means is to be set aside, correct? Right. So they've been set aside by God as his people. And every one of them, it says, and the Lord is in their midst. There's really nothing wrong with that statement. For all the congregation are holy, every one of them, the Lord is in their midst. But here's the problem. So why do you exalt yourself above the assembly of the Lord? You see, that statement takes what he said just prior and twists it just a little bit. Why are you exalting yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? Oh, there's a problem there. Because Moses and Aaron have been chosen by God to lead this ragtag group of, as Rich Mullins would say, ragamuffins. They've been chosen to do this. They're bringing an accusation that Moses and Aaron are pretty much just exalting themselves above everyone else, and God really has nothing to do with it. That's the problem. What they're doing is they're calling their leadership and their status into question that was given to them by God. Moses speaks up and says that the next morning there's going to be a test, and to take a censer with fire and incense on the top in the presence of the Lord, and God will show who is holy. If we remember back to Exodus 3, we remember that Moses had a really tough time with his calling. As a matter of fact, came up with five different excuses as to why he couldn't do it. And while he got kicked into it, or while he got drug into it, kicking and screaming, God making provisions at every turn to his objections. As time has gone on, Moses is more secure in his calling than he was before. He has embraced this calling. He knows that God has chosen him and Aaron as the leaders enough to say, tomorrow we're going to do this, and God will show who's holy. He's sure of his calling, absolutely, positively, unequivocally sure of what he's been called to. He knows it. God has separated the Levites to bring them nearer to himself, to serve in the tabernacle and minister to the congregation. That is their purpose. God wanted to destroy everybody. God wanted to destroy every last bit of them. I'm going to find it here. Hold on. Verse 20. It says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them instantly. That is not a good statement. He's ready to destroy them. But they fell on their faces, they being Moses and Aaron. But they fell on their faces and said, O God, God of the spirits of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be angry with the entire congregation? Kind of hard to argue with that one, right? Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the congregation, saying, Get back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Did you notice there was a name missing? Where's On? That's the real question. On is never mentioned again. The only place he's mentioned is the very beginning, where he sided with Korah, Dathan, and Abiram and the 250 elders. It's the only place he appears. He mysteriously disappears from the beginning of chapter 16 to where we are here in verse 24. God strikes down Korah, Dathan, and Abiram and their entire families with the 250 men who rose up against them. Struck them down. On, per the Talmud, which is, the Torah and the Talmud are two different things. The Torah is the first 5 books. It's what we call the Pentateuch. It's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's the Torah. Okay. The Talmud is the oral traditions of the elders of Israel, if I understand it correctly. I may be wrong about that, but from what I think that is, it is the passed down traditions. And according to the Talmud, whatever this book is, regardless of what it is, according to the Talmud, On's wife rebelled against him. In fact, when a wife is rebelling against the leadership of her husband in that day, she would sit outside of the tent. No one can go in that tent after him. When they came to gather all of this stuff up, it is quite possible that On's wife saved his life and their family, because she rebelled against this, going, no, we don't need to be rebelling against Moses and Aaron. Very quite possible that she saved the family's life by rebelling against her husband. See, there's a time and a place for husbands and wives to submit to each other. And there is a time, if there is some ungodly leadership, to say no. Not the time or the place. Okay? Basically, what goes on here is a picture of judgment. They rebelled against God's chosen leader in pride. They're sitting here going, who are you? Who died and made you king? Well, nobody died, but God made him king. Not really king. Leader-ish. See, Moses becomes one of the biggest leaders in Jewish history. It's always, have you ever noticed in the New Testament, it's always referred to as Moses and the prophets? Yeah. The second part of their failure, it doesn't end with Korah's rebellion, unfortunately. God puts a judgment on them. These 3 guys, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and the 250 elders, he doesn't just judge them, but the leader, the Israelites who are left, verse 41, goes on and says this. You think they'd learn their lesson. But on the next day, all the congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You are the ones who have caused the death of the Lord's people. Did you not just see what happened? Are you really missing the point here?" Israel is now accusing Moses and Aaron of causing the death of the Lord's people. Do you hear the arrogance in their statement? Not only did Korah and his cohorts and the 250 leaders of Israel stand up and say in arrogance, "Who are you? Quit exalting yourself above us." And they were struck down for it. And yet the Israelites are now here saying again, "Well, you're the ones that have caused the death of the Lord's people." Y'all didn't learn very much out of the last one, did you? That is a huge statement of arrogance against God's chosen leadership. And actually, in all actuality, Moses and Aaron interceded on behalf of the Israelites not just once, but twice. They interceded on behalf of the... God was ready to strike them down. And the people they're accusing of having their best interest not in their mind are the ones interceding for them. They're the ones who are trying to save them. Does that sound anything like our culture in Jesus Christ? I mean, seriously. The one who is trying to save them is the one they're downgrading. Verses 21 and 22 and verses 45 and 46, Moses and Aaron intercede on behalf of the people. God is ready to strike them down again. This time, instead of striking down Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and the 250 leaders and their families, or those 3 men and their families and the 250 leaders, this time God sends a plague and kills 14,700 of them. Both times are instances of both rebellion and grumbling. Remember what I said the definition of grumbling was? Muttering and growling. Yeah, that's what they're doing. They did not learn from the mistake made the first time. Here's the key. And you're going to find each week, that there is the one common thing that ties all of these failures together is the lack of belief on part of Israel. It all comes down to unbelief. The point in each one of these is showing how try that again. The point of all this is to show how this unbelief manifests itself in different ways. Greed last week. Wondering the first week, and the second week they're questioning and they end up wandering in the desert. This week the rebellion and grumbling comes from their unbelief. They did not believe and they do not trust in the Lord's lead. And not only do they not trust the Lord's lead, but because they don't trust the Lord's lead, they don't trust the men who God has placed in charge over them either. God does not take unbelief lightly. That's the reason for striking down Korah, Dathan, Abiram, their families, and the leaders. That is the reason for the plague that comes on and kills 14,700 of them. It is a lesson to be learned that God does not take unbelief lightly. If we really want to get down to it, they're all pictures of what is coming in the future. It is all pictures of the judgment of God against all those who would reject his plan of salvation. Righteousness by faith through Jesus Christ. If you reject that, there are consequences to that. When you rebel against the godly leadership, you're rebelling against God. Now, With that said, do you remember On's wife? We can call her Ani, because I don't. She's got to have a name. I gotta have. So I can't just call her On's wife. It's like Lot's wife. Lot's wife doesn't have a name either. Call her Lottie. I don't know. Forgive me. I'm sorry. but Ani here saves the life of her family by rebelling against her husband because his leadership is not good. There is a time and a place. You see, churchianity is a problem. There are churches who rebel against godly leaders. I see it all the time. Churches just completely rejecting godly men who God has set above them, or not above them, but set them over them to lead them in the proper way. And these churches completely rebel against their leadership. But in the same token, in the same breath, there are also churches who can sniff out a bad leader and a false leader real quick, and he's out of there. Got a guy in my Connect group having a problem with yet another church. At what point do you realize the problem may not be the church? Could it possibly be your theology? Could it possibly be, I'm not saying either way. I don't know anything about him or the church. I don't know anything. It could be either way. The church could be rejecting a godly leader, but yet on the same token, the church could be sniffing out a bad one. It's not for me to decide. Not for me to decide at all. Not my place. Not my situation. As my favorite saying is these days, not my monkeys, not my circus. My point in saying this is that there are churches who can sniff out a bad leader and protect the flock, and there are churches who reject a godly leader who God has set over them. When we rebel against a godly leader, we rebel against God himself, because the problem is not the leader, the problem is a trust in God. It's easy to be skeptical of somebody who claims to have a message from God. The prophets, the preachers, the teachers, prophets of old, in the Old Testament, how many prophets do we see? Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all of these prophets, and even more, they are, Elijah, they're utterly rejected by Israel because they've got a message. It's not what all the other prophets are preaching. They've got a message that's different than the rest of them, and they're completely rejected. Just because a majority of people think that something is true in Christianity, I would argue and urge you to beware. Because what's popular is probably not correct. As a matter of fact, per reading the Bible, I can make a better case that what's popular isn't correct, and it's the non-mainstream stuff that is. Because the truth of God is rejected. What does John 3 say after Christ, Jesus himself? Men love darkness. We naturally gravitate towards it. And we can go back and forth on whether there are modern day prophets or not. I tend to think that there are. That's a discussion for another time in another place, probably more a one-on-one than from the pulpit. But there are prophets, preachers, and teachers and the like. And here's my urging. If you're questioning somebody, I throw out guys like, Kenneth Copeland, Benny Hinn, and Joel Osteen. I throw out these guys. I throw out these names pretty at the drop of a hat. Stephen Furtick. I could name several of them. Here's my urging. Let time be the decider of these preachers and teachers, or prophets if they are claiming to be that. Let time be the marker. Is what they say line up with what Scripture says, or does it not? And I'm going to say this too. This isn't just for the Joel Osteens, the Kenneth Copelands, the Benny Hinns. This is not just for the David Platts and all of these big name guys that you see in the bookstores. It's not just them. You test what I say too. Just saying. I'm just saying, because I don't have the corner on the market on truth. If there's anything I've realized more in the past 3 years is how wrong I can be. Just saying. Because if there's one thing I can tell you is that every time I read this book, there's something that stands out and my thinking shifts just a little bit. I can go back through some of my old sermons and be like, wow, that has definitely shifted since the last time I looked at that. Here's the thing, you can tell a tree by its fruit. It's the whole Matthew 7 passage. It is the Mark 11 and the parable of the fig, or not the parable of the fig tree, but the fig tree that Christ walks by going into and out of the temple. You can tell a tree by its fruit. Or if the tree is not ready to bear fruit, you can tell that one too. Next week we're going to look at the instance where the leader gets a little bit too prideful. We're going to look at where Moses fails. It's the waters of Meribah. And because of the failure at the waters of Meribah, because Moses didn't believe God, Moses is not allowed to step foot into the promised land. Still rescued, still saved, but not allowed to step foot in the promised land. He gets to see it, but he failed. And it serves as a warning to anybody in leadership. Anybody, period. I don't care whether you're in leadership or not. It serves as a reminder to not let your pride get a hold of you. Because there are days that I think that I could make the case pretty well. I have said this before. I can make the case that it's not the behavior that's the sin, it's the prideful attitude towards God that results in the behavior. It's not the behavior. It's the prideful attitude towards God. And that is what trips us up. It's why atheists reject the gospel. It's a pride issue. And let me tell you what, there ain't no amount of apologetics or debates that can overcome that. Just not. Unbelief can cause us to rebel and grumble against God and those who he has set in place. God sets up leaders, he takes down leaders. He sets up churches, as we see in Revelation. The 7 churches of Revelation threatens to take the lampstand away. He's the one who establishes these things. He's the one who gives them their authority. He is the one who can take them down. Where are you at this morning? A prayer that I pray is one that one that everyone should consider, and that is help my unbelief. Because while I am more solid in my faith and calling now than I ever have been, I'm also sure that there are places of unbelief in my worldview that I know have issues. We've all got them. We've all got issues in areas where unbelief takes hold, and we need to let God take that, and there's a let our the mind the worldview needs to shift. Just no other way about it. The worldview needs to shift. Father, help my unbelief. I believe. Help my unbelief.